mic on? I think the mic's on.
All right, what is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to, or welcome back to the channel. My name is Ty if you're new here. This is my MK6 GTD that I've built up here in the beautiful country of Canada. And today we're gonna go over some modifications and stuff that I'd recommend to you guys if you've now got your hands on a 2-liter TDI common rail, no matter where you are in the US, Canada, the UK. All of these modifications, or at least most of them, should apply to you. And I'm sorry if I sound a little bit stuffed up. I do have a little bit of a cold. I just came back from Cuba, so it's time to jump back into making some videos. If you're new here, I guess you've got your hands, or you're thinking about getting your hands on a 2-liter TDI. Now, as I've covered in some of my other videos that you can go and check out if you are new to the channel here, the 2-liter TDI Golf is basically one of the best cars you can buy in the near future, seeing as how all of these things are coming out of warranty very soon due to all the Dieselgate stuff, if you know about that and know a little bit about Volkswagens. So these things are gonna be awesome vehicles to buy coming up pretty quick because they'll all have been serviced at Volkswagen, had all of the updates and everything done. They'll most likely be very well taken care of cars because most of the people that do currently own these cars have them as commuter vehicles instead of go fast builds, kind of like mine is. So I'm gonna kind of break this video up into two different categories based on kind of a more economic build versus a high performance, you want to go fast for relatively cheap money, because diesels, if you guys are a return subscriber on my channel, know that diesels aren't cheap to build. This is probably the most expensive build I've ever done in any vehicle I've ever owned, and I've owned over 20 cars and I'm 25 years old, so. But without rambling on too much longer, we're gonna go over the first 3 modifications I would recommend in terms of if you're buying one of these cars to daily and basically drive into the ground until it won't drive no more. So first thing on the list with any 2-liter TDI is, compared to gas cars, the tuning is a little bit more confusing because there are not only a lot more stages, but the stages for Volkswagen gas cars doesn't exactly line up with what TDIs actually do. So a completely stock 2-liter common rail with most companies can be tuned up to a stage 2. So there's tons of diesel tuners out there that make tunes for these cars, lots of very reputable companies, and they do produce obviously some very solid numbers. Now, who you choose comes down completely to, I guess, price, performance, like your modifications and that kind of thing. So whoever you go with, it doesn't really matter. But most 2-liter TDIs and most companies that supply tunes are capable completely stock with no exhaust, no intake, no nothing, able to go up to stage 2. If you're looking to build something for economy, you're commuting to school, to work, to whatever, stage 0.5 or a stage 1 tune on these cars is more than enough to wake them up on a stock turbo. These cars, like pretty much every Volkswagen ever created, are fairly turned down from the factory, especially with a diesel, that being torque. You gain a lot more torque out of tuning these just with no modifications than you will horsepower. That's just kind of how diesels work. That would be my first economic build mod. Number 1, do tune, completely stock, you'll be fine. Most companies will support, provide support in terms of like what modifications you have and let you know what you're actually capable of doing if you do have other slight modifications. Mod number 2, and this is a fairly big one. This one's a little bit more expensive. This is a longevity kind of thing. It also trickles a little bit into the performance side of stuff, but that would be the CP3 fuel pump upgrade, which would be right here, and I'll throw in some B-roll footage of the CP3 and whatnot. Now, doing this upgrade is fairly important. The stock fuel pump that comes on the 2-liter common rails, and actually the 3 liters as well, is the CP4. Now, for those of you that have done any research in TDI tuning or know anything about Volkswagen diesels, the CP4 fuel pump, a lot of them, well, I wouldn't say a lot of them, but a decent amount have run into basically destroying themselves over time. And when that happens, you're basically writing off the entire fuel system in the car. So the reason I recommend doing the CP3 upgrade, even though most of the time it's around about $1,000 to do it, is because you're basically getting rid of the possibility of having to, in the future, pay for an entire fuel system. The fuel systems on these cars are mighty, mighty expensive. We're talking fuel lines, pump, filters, all the lot, like the lines from the tank to the engine, return lines, fuel tank, like lift pump, injectors, pretty much everything once a CP4 detonates can be written off. There are some cases when I used to actually work for Volkswagen as a mechanic. There are certain components that you can save. Most of the time it's not really worth going through the hassle of trying to diagnose and test and make sure those components you want to save actually work. So most of the time it would just be a full-on replacement of absolutely everything. Now, going back to the whole warranty thing, since these are all coming out of warranty, if that were to happen to you, that's no longer covered, and that's a bill that basically would probably cost the value of whatever TDI you end up picking up, depending on mileage, to replace all those parts. So CP3 is, once again, like I said, a very important modification or preventative mod that I would recommend throwing on any TDI at this point. If you're planning on keeping it for a long time, CP3 is definitely one of the go-tos for that. As far as for economy's sake, there are lots of performance modifications that you can do to the 2-liter TDIs. I wouldn't recommend doing an exhaust if you're looking for fuel economy and that kind of thing, or an intake or intercooler, charge piping, or any of that stuff. If you're looking to save money, get better fuel economy, and you just want your car to have longevity, then like I said, tune, CP3, and then good regular maintenance always is the key to having these things run for absolutely forever. Timing belt is obviously very important to check. When you're doing the CP3, it is timing belt driven, so obviously at the same time I would recommend doing the timing belt as well. Just a maintenance thing. You're in there, might as well do it, not have to do it again in the near future. So that will pretty much do it for economy purposes. And I know some people in the comments will probably be like, oh, well, like you could do a delete downpipe and then do like a stage 2 or something on a stock turbo and you'll get better fuel economy or whatever. Personally, like I said, I wouldn't recommend going that far right off the bat because you're gaining more performance than you are in fuel economy. So it doesn't quite take away from the daily drivability or the fact that you're going to be dealing it and focusing more on performance, but you're just not going to see any ginormous gain in fuel economy from going from a stage 0.5 or a stage 1 to a stage 2 with a downpipe or something like that. So that's why I wouldn't recommend it. However, now if we go into the performance side of modifications and that kind of thing, number one is now going to be that downpipe. So even with gas cars, and I have other videos, I used to have the A3AP where my biggest recommendation, number one, is a downpipe with a tune. Same thing for this. Now, I want a precursor. Obviously, the big elephant in the room with being a TDI is when you do a downpipe, you are deleting the DPF and depending on if you do like a mid-pipe and everything, you're deleting the catalytic converters, which is your emissions stuff. Yay, emissions. In the US, especially, is the big one. You guys have the EPA, which are the brothers and sisters who are going to come after you and make you go through all of the smog checks and that kind of thing, especially in California, all the emissions testing so that you're able to drive your car every year. Up here in Canada, we don't have EPA, so we don't really have too much to worry about there. Obviously, we do have vehicle inspections that can be ordered by police, and that's a whole nother video that we can get into at some point. But for off-road use, if you are going to be using your vehicle for off-road purposes, you can do the downpipe install and then throw a tune on it. This is where you're gonna see the most amount of performance gain completely stock. There are other modifications that I will talk about a little bit farther into the video to get even more power out of it. But if you're looking for just a bing bang boom, throw a downpipe on there, throw a tune on it, make a decent amount of power, stage 2 plus a delete downpipe, whatever you want to call it, is the way to go for these cars. They make some decent power. They get some nice little turbo spool noises, and I know everybody loves to hear the turbo. And then at that point, if you want to throw a full exhaust on it, you're more than welcome to. Stage 2 isn't really going to net too many more gains just from having a full exhaust on it. So that goes back to the whole cost versus effect that we were talking about with the economy stuff. It's just not worth it at that point. Now the CP3 also, in terms of performance, does help out quite a little bit here as well. So if you wanted to go the economy route and then do performance in the future, you'd also benefit from a CP3 as well, especially if you go into bigger injectors or a bigger turbo in the future, and you need to flow more fuel to compensate for more air in the engine and yada yada yada, you know the deal with all that stuff. So my next recommendation is, if you're going for performance, turbocharger upgrade. Most vehicles have fairly expensive turbo upgrades. A lot of the 2-liter TFSI stuff can get into the $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 range for doing big turbo upgrades. And the beautiful thing about the 2-liter TDIs is, until you get into the 2260, 2872 large turbo setups, you don't really have much to worry about. So what I would recommend in terms of doing a turbo upgrade is, if you want to do a CR, the stock turbo is technically CR 140 in Canada on the 2 liters in the Gulf. There's CR 170. If you want to go a little bit bigger, you can do custom kits with a 1756 or a 2260. I would recommend, if you're planning on not really doing a whole lot of anything past a turbo upgrade, like you don't want to do injectors or an intercooler or anything like that, largest I would recommend is a CR 190 if you can get your hands on one. A CR 190 in these cars is more than enough power to have a little bit of fun. You're not going to sacrifice too much fuel economy by having to feed such a massive turbo like a 2872, which is what I have on my car. And once you start getting into, obviously, high power applications and that kind of thing, one of the things I forgot to mention with going with a stage 2 and tuning, obviously if you are a manual, you should be okay. Anything actually above a stage 0.5 or stage 1 on a DSG 2-liter common rail, you're actually going to need a DSG tune, just because the stock DSG isn't set up to handle the amount of torque that these cars can make once you start bumping up the power a little bit. So DSG tune is another thing that I would definitely recommend once you start going past the stage 0.5, stage 1 area, just so that you can not only not blow up your DSG, but be able to put the power to the ground, get a little bit better shifting points, all that fun stuff. And then one of the last modifications that I would recommend for you guys that are in the future wanting to do a little bit higher horsepower applications, a lot of what I have going on is pretty custom. And this is not only a performance thing, but also a preventative maintenance kind of thing. So if you are mechanically inclined, such as myself, and are able to do mechanical engine stuff, one of the things I would definitely recommend are doing head studs. For those of you that know anything about the ALHs, with the 11 mil pumps and big turbos and upgraded nozzles and all that stuff, head studs became a pretty common upgrade, just because once you're making 40 or 50 pounds of boost through these motors, the only thing stopping that boost escaping or lifting the head off your car are the stock head bolts, which aren't super fantastic at doing so. I got lucky. I had a 2260 on here before I had head studs, and luckily nothing ever happened. I put a 2872 on the stock engine and actually ended up, we're pretty sure, bending a rod in the old motor, so we got a built one in here. But you never know. It's luck of the draw at that point with the common rails. I would definitely recommend doing it if you are mechanically inclined. Like I said, head studs aren't too expensive. I think you can get them from Darkside for about 200 euros, so about 300-ish Canadian with shipping. And they're pretty easy to install. The cams in these cars have a certain point where you can go past them to get the head bolts out, and you just kind of do one at a time to throw them back in. So it's a relatively easy install if you know what you're doing, but definitely one that I would recommend if you're planning on doing any sort of big power in the future. Now I'm just gonna cover some other stuff that a lot of people I know are probably gonna get to the end of the video or skip right to the comments and be like, oh, well, like, you should do this and you should do this and like blah, 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 and like that kind of thing. Now, there are obviously other modifications that you can do to these cars. I have a custom intake on my TDI, not necessary really at all. Big intakes on TDIs aren't gonna net you too much until you do larger turbos and that kind of thing. So if you're going stage 2 on a stock turbo, you don't need to follow, like I said, the recipe for doing a gas car, as the stock Volkswagen intakes have been proven time and time again to be very efficient up until you even do a big turbo on a gas car. So no point doing an intake. I wouldn't recommend wasting your money on doing an intercooler until, like I said, you're up on the big turbo area. I've custom charge piping, again, another thing I wouldn't recommend until you're doing big custom stuff. I also do have a catch can on my TDI. I covered a video for that, so you can check that video out in the description. I've got all the parts list and everything for that I'm still kind of testing out. It's a little bit of a custom setup not a kit at all, so it's kind of pieced together Lego style. For me, we're just trying to see if that kind of helps with a little bit of the crankcase pressure that my engine produces, so that it's not constantly shipping oil back through the intake side of the turbo, to help it hopefully last a little bit longer and have a cleaner combustion cycle, because we're not recycling oil. That's one that you could do for longevity. On a stock turbo, probably wouldn't need it, just because you probably don't have a lot of crankcase pressure, but you never know. It depends on the health of the motor, so that could be something that you might want to look into as well. And like I said, I will link that video down below. But other than that, that's pretty much it, guys. There's tons and tons of mods for these cars nowadays, especially. You can do upgraded injectors and like the whole 9 yards, built motor, that kind of thing. But these are just kind of the entry to intermediate level modifications I would recommend for, like I said, an economy build, and then also a little bit of a performance setup without going too crazy. But anyways, if you're new here, this is my Mark 6 GTD. I have tons of other videos on my channel if you want to go check it out, covering the whole build. I have a fully built engine in this car as well, along with a whole suspension setup, race seats, the whole 9 yards, and it sounds pretty damn good. So don't forget to subscribe and go check out those other videos if you are new. But anyways, guys, that will about do it for today's video. Peace out. I'll see you in the next one.